been. Like I was going for like just awkward timing across the board.
This is what the Patreon tier is itching to hear, Brian.
Yep.
How you troll us with time is count offs every
Yeah.
week.
God, no. That's the worst ever. Like who
I'd listen to that.
you'd listen to Bryan trolling? All right.
Well,
That's a pretty blanket statement. I think a lot of judges would listen to Brian trolling for an hour.
Hey guys.
In fact, new Patreon level, pay us, $1,000 a week, and
hold
we'll
on,
just
hold
sit
on, hold
on
on,
the level.
hold on, guys. I gotta start again. The recording didn't take. I need to start.
No.
Again. No, I'm kidding. That's a troll. That's a double troll.
double troll, double troll.
A troll within
troll.
a troll. Yes.
A troll.
All right. Trollolo. All right. Ready to get started? Hello and welcome to JudgeCast. This is episode 346. I'm one of your hosts, Bryan Perlman, and I am joined this evening, afternoon, morning drive to work by the one and only Charles Feather.
Hello, Atrolla.
And the one and only Marco Sanchez.
Trollololololol.
Yep, I earned that. All right. In this episode, in one of the calm before the storm episodes between pre-release episodes, we're going to try and talk about some policy stuff.
Whoa, dream big.
So generally speaking, when we get a policy update, we're going to spend an entire episode going over all of the policy updates. So we were geared up for a real chunky policy update episode. And then the policy updates came out.
And it was just a snack.
It's just a little bite-sized morsel. So, we're going to go over the policy updates super fast, and then we're going to go into another topic that's also policy related. All right. So it says the whole updates are 11 words long, or like 11 words long. Okay.
Really burying the lead
Right.
there.
Okay. So what do we got? What's the first change?
Well, speed is a status, so that's kind of a non-issue.
Status information.
We kind of knew that that's what it was, but it is now formally enshrined within the policy for Magic the Gathering, and speed is a status.
It's status information, which means we have to make it visible. We have to announce when it changes, that kind of thing. Before, technically, speed was hidden information.
And that's just awkward.
With strict
Makes
interpretation.
perfect sense.
Well, because the way everything's defined is if it's not defined as status or free or derived, then it's hidden. And that means, I'm attacking you with a creature.
So for a whole week, players, you could have had up like your DM shield and had your status information hidden behind it, along with all those dice rolls where you rolled crits. I'm sure you did.
I'm just attacking behind my screen, man. You don't get to see. Okay. Now, what is the second change?
The next one is about the English language, and specifically the word reveal. So the CR defines reveal as showing something to all players, but the MTR actually talks about it when you're talking about revealing hidden information. And apparently that caused, I'll say, a kerfuffle in multiplayer, specifically like a two-headed giant game.
Oh, let's
Like,
be
does
real. It was EDH.
It was CDH probably.
It was absolutely CDH.
But since nobody who writes policy likes to acknowledge CEDH,
Right.
we're going to talk about it in the terms of two-headed giant instead. So,
Yes, we're going to pretend that it exists.
So we'll pretend that somebody who writes policy was watching a game of two-headed giant for some reason and realized that when a player wanted to reveal their hand to their partner, does that mean they have to reveal to all players like the CR defines it? Or is there confusion around that word? So they just went, forget it. Remove the word entirely from this section, and just making it explicitly stated that you can share hidden information you might have with whomever you want. That may or may not be something that's kind of also just outright written in other less official rules documents. But
I am still going to call my mom during the middle of the game and tell her what, never mind. That's a bad idea.
Yeah, but
Don't
if you
do
say
that,
the hidden
folks,
information out loud, it's not really hidden information, is it? But you can choose to reveal it because you have that power.
Yep.
All right. I have the power.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And now the next one, which is also not talked about in terms of CEDH, but is clearly CEDH driven also, it says that bribery has long been defined as taking an action in exchange for an incentive. Okay, well, in 1v1, your incentive is typically to win. It's like most of your actions are deliberately related to winning. So you might not tell your opponent, hey, I'll sacrifice this creature if you sacrifice your creature. In 1v1, that makes no sense. But it's technically bribery. However, in what format do you have such bizarre conversations as, if I sacrifice this creature, will you sacrifice your creature? And the answer is, Marcos?
Two-headed giant.
Yes, two-headed
wait,
giant.
no.
Giant. That was perfect.
Yes.
Well timed.
Yes, two-headed giant is now code for CEDH.
Yes, okay, very good. Two-headed giant. So yes, we have this problem in two-headed giant. So now they've added the fact that bribery is taking an outside of the game action in order to provide an incentive reward. Okay. And realistically, like, I sacrifice all of my creatures so that you can steamroll. I mean, that's basically conceding, so let's not be cute. You are still allowed to use your brain. Okay? Even though we're talking about two-headed giant.
Wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Yes, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. All right.
Well, that was easy.
Yeah.
Episode over. Let's go.
There we go. Nope. We're gonna upgrade you to a mega-sized JudgeCast episode where we're gonna talk about another thing, and that's how to get first class when you started out in Coach.
The best kind of upgrade.
Tips and tricks.
See, here I thought you were going to go straight into that Beyonce song.
He
Upgrade
may not
you?
know that one.
Is that a Beyonce song?
Upgrade you. Absolutely.
Is it a popular one?
It's Beyonce. Of course.
Beyonce, they're all popular.
I mean, no, she's got to have some that people like aren't super familiar with.
Some B-sides?
I'm sorry.
No, there's no such thing. As
I
B-side
see what you did
Beyonce
there.
song.
A B-side? Okay, moving on.
Now you've got me. Like, there's got to be something. Like I'm sure there's lesser known Taylor Swift songs.
Look, this isn't Metallica's Lulu album, all right? This is Beyonce. She's the queen. Thank you.
Wow. Deep dives. Anyways, what are we doing?
Okay,
We're upgrading you?
We're talking about upgrades. So this episode, we're going to talk about what infractions have an upgrade and how to recognize them.
So what is an upgrade?
It's when you order medium fries and you want the large.
Awesome.
No.
It's when you get 11 nuggies in your bag.
Yeah, dude, that 11th nuggie is...
It's the best.
Like, I feel like I should have a crown and a scepter when I get the 11th nug. All right, so what is an upgrade?
An upgrade is when the penalty of an infraction in the IPG increases by at least one level. And that's typically because of one or two things. Either you keep making the same mistake over and over again, where that lower grade penalty didn't really do enough to get you to just stop it, or what you did was so egregious that we need to level this up. We need to upgrade you to just really encourage you to not do this ever again. Because remember, these penalties are supposed to be deterrences to stop you from doing this. We don't want you making all these mistakes and all these errors, possibly gaining advantages from them. So we want to make sure you stop it. And sometimes it doesn't sink in on the first time.
We need to encourage you to never do this again.
Exactly. And it depends what you're upgrading to. You know, you upgrade to a game loss from a warning. Yeah, that's pretty severe. We upgrade you to a disqualification. Oh, you're never doing this again, and you might not even still be here at this point.
Yeah. All right. So let's start off with regular rel. Because we've typically said that at regular rel, everything's either hugs or DQ, right?
Well,
It's either like, shh, I'll fix it. Let me fix the problem, or GTFO. But turns out, in this 1.5-page document, there are 4 places where upgrades can happen.
whoa.
4!
That's wild. I never counted them, but that's, yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
All right.
Here we go.
Remember, the jar is a flexible document. It's meant to do a lot in 2 pages. So that's why there are so many different paths towards this, because Magic's complicated, and we have all these wonderful players that come in and play under this rule set and policy set. And every once in a while, you have somebody that needs a little correction. So from the first place of the jar that it happens, it reads regular rel is many players' first experience of tournament Magic. Hey, what did I just say? So ensuring a welcoming and inclusive atmosphere is important. A player whose behavior may be upsetting others or making them uncomfortable should be educated and asked to stop immediately. If they make no attempt to correct their behavior, applying a game loss may reinforce the seriousness of this issue. So basically, when you have a player who is acting out, you can game loss them after you have spoken to them once or maybe twice. It depends on the exact circumstances. There's some flexibility here. Typically, things shouldn't actually get to this point. You're going to talk to the player. Maybe you'll get the TO involved because the TO has an image and they want to protect their store and their reputation. And they want to protect the other players that are there to have a good time. So, it's generally a pretty straightforward thing. But every once in a while, a player will sit there and maybe they're hyped up on the sugar. Too much caffeine is bad for you, kids.
You got them sugar snacks.
Can I interject here? I just had a week where, so my wife is a music teacher, and we had this brilliant idea that she was going to bring her kids. She teaches middle and high school kids music, and we're going to have them do this cool project where they're like, it's literally like School of Rock style. They come into my recording studio and record a song. I just had 4 days of middle and high schoolers running roughshod over my library, and oh boy, kids hopped up on their sugar cereal will do dumb things. I can promise you that. So yeah, this is exactly for that. Like, sometimes poking them once and telling them not to do that goes in one ear and right out the other. And sometimes you need to step it up and be like, okay, put on grown-up voice and listen, you do this again, we're gonna have a problem and you might get a game loss.
So this is years and years ago. I'm not going to go into a super lot of the details, but a player just announced something silly to the entire tournament and was like making a big deal out of this silly thing. And policy and penalty and stuff like that was all different. But I was just like, I need you to just stop. And he's like, no, I was just doing it. I need you to just stop right now. Okay. And my direct instructions to him at the time was if you don't stop acting stupid, I'm going to give you a game loss. And so he turned around and went to the head judge and said, and where I could hear, he was like, dude, that judge told me that if I don't stop acting stupid, he's going to give me a game loss. Can he do that? And the head judge just leaned around the player, looked at me. I just nodded, and the head judge leaned back and was like, yup.
Excellent.
Yes. All right. This was not regular. This was a COPREL event. So I can fill in details, but they're not relevant anymore because it's 12-year-old policy. Anyway, second place in the jar that mentions... Now, that's in the second paragraph of the jar. Okay? That big paragraph before we even get to common issues. Now, the second place in the jar says, hey, if a player accidentally breaks a rule, use the remedies described below. This is where the common issues are. And your common sense as guidance to make the best ruling you can. If you feel that the suggested remedy is not suitable, you may suggest a more appropriate fix. Okay? Then it goes on. Player education is a priority. Remind the players to play more carefully, but avoid being heavy-handed in order to keep your events fun and fair. Now, that sentence, avoid being heavy-handed. Period. If a player continues to repeat a mistake despite multiple reminders, be heavy-handed. No, if a player continues to repeat the mistakes despite multiple reminders, you may warn them that the next occurrence will result in a game loss. So this is, hey, if you keep acting stupid in terms of violating rules, you're going to get a game loss.
And it says multiple. It doesn't mean
Yeah.
one time and then you're going to that. It doesn't mean necessarily 2 times you go to that. But you hit that 3rd or 4th time and you have to talk to them about the same rules interaction. I think it's a conversation. And you need to be saying those words. You need to be saying, player, I know that you're trying very hard, or however you want to phrase it. Player, I need you to stop or you're going to receive a game loss.
Right. And this is actually kind of hard. This is a really rare, like, game losses at regular rel. I mean, that's what this is. This is an upgrade. You're upgrading the finger wag to a game loss.
Yeah,
these are very rare. I'm having a hard time thinking of something at a regular rel event where I've talked to a player like multiple times and they just keep making the same mistake.
I've never gotten to this point, but I know that it happens. So it's in here.
It seems
it's
to be
here
basically
for you.
policy for belligerence more than anything. Like,
yeah, but sometimes people just don't get something. And you have to be able to thump the table and say, hey, this is it.
This is like constantly casting spells for the wrong mana, and you know that the person's not cheating because of whatever reason. Because if we assume cheating, then the answers become easy.
Right.
But this is someone who's constantly attacking with creatures that don't have haste on the turn that they come out. This is someone who's not paying attention to the mana that they're using to cast spells, and they're casting with the wrong mana. Stuff like that. This is, I guess those are probably the 2 most common.
It almost sounds like the player just is playing while drunk or something like that, where they're just like clearly not in the right state of mind to be playing, but it's like, all right, we need to really in somehow. Right. Although again, even that is just like you're probably just being asked to leave by the TO.
Well, they're drunk but sober. Like,
sure.
Yeah. Okay. What's next?
All right. The next area is actually the general unwanted behaviors. And there's 2 different types of upgrades in here, as you can imagine, because up until now we've been in the, very soft, like, hey, let's not do that again. Okay, you keep doing this again. This might turn into a game loss if you don't stop. Now we're into the, okay, we really don't want this to happen. And so we're going to give you the opportunity to upgrade a warning to a game loss here if somebody repeatedly keeps doing the same generally unwanted behavior. And that's like list all of them here, and just like you have the ability to give your pokes and warnings some teeth, because again, we really don't want this to happen.
Right. And so general unwanted behaviors, inadequate shuffling, taking an unreasonable amount of time making play decisions or sideboarding, asking for providing strategic advice, tardiness, and then deterring match outcomes by incentives, coercions, outside the game methods, that kind of stuff. Right. So if someone is playing very slowly and it's impacting folks' desire to attend FNM, you can game loss that player for playing slowly. Right. Now that's assuming that they're not doing it on purpose. If they're doing any of those things intentionally, what happens?
Oh, that's the best kind of upgrade, where we upgrade that unwanted behavior and we kick that up to a serious problem, which is where we just disqualify them and you're out of this event.
So it's not the best kind of upgrade, but it's sometimes necessary to protect the integrity of the event. To it gives faith to the other players who are going to remain behind. You can look at it as a couple different ways, but the number one thing is it's demonstrating to other players who are there that you guys take something seriously about how the event should be seen. We can all have a good time, but it's important.
Well, yeah. Like let's just talk inadequate shuffling. Okay, lots of people will do like 2 riffle shuffles and then present. Hey, I need you to shuffle better. Hey, I need you to shuffle better. Hey, I need you because sometimes people they're not in a habit of doing it. That's fine. We can say, hey, next time you do that, game loss. But if they're inadequately shuffling on purpose, that's cheats.
Yep. Can't have that.
Right? That's a serious problem. Also, if someone was deliberately late, like deliberately late in a malicious way, like they're like, haha, I can be 9 minutes late and you have to give me an extension and I don't care about your times. Might kick that up, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. These are all very, very rare occurrences. I cannot imagine a single time I've ever had to give an upgraded penalty at regular. In fact, I think I can only count maybe on 1 or 2 instances where I've ever even had to threaten an upgrade, but it's there if you need it, which is kind of the point.
All right, so that's the jar. Okay, so now we're gonna move into the IPG,
which is the land of many upgrades.
the land of milk and upgrades. All right, so let's talk about some specific ones. The IPG is structured as gameplay errors, tournament errors, and then unsporting conduct. So I think from a upgrade standpoint, we should probably talk about them the same way, as in like the specific upgrades and then the umbrella category upgrades. Sound like a plan?
Sounds good.
All right.
Sure.
What's up first?
Miss triggers. So generally, triggers are good things. Not getting your trigger is a sufficient penalty for missing it in the course of a game. Sometimes triggers can be bad for you though, and those cases require a little bit more attention by the judge who is handling the call. So if a triggered ability is usually considered detrimental for the controlling player, it doesn't have to always be detrimental, but if it's usually considered detrimental for the controlling player and they own the card responsible for the existence of the trigger, then that penalty is a warning. So that's the upgrade here. Instead of a non penalty, now we're talking about an actual penalty for mistrigger. The current game state is not a factor in determining this, although symmetrical abilities such as Howling Mind may be considered usually detrimental or not, depending on who is being affected. Some important points here. It is a warning, and since this is the first time we're talking about these in the framework of the IPG, we have a no penalty, then warning, then game loss, then match loss, then DQ. Those are the different levels. So warnings are tracked. Okay, that's the first level where they're tracked, and they're tracked by the tournament software or the people running the tournament. And it can be subject to a double upgrade if it's your third at this level. So you would get, if you had a detrimental, a mistrigger warning in round 1, and then you have a mistrigger warning in round 3, and then in round 8 of the same day, you do it again, then we're going to upgrade. So the other thing that we have to take into account are when triggers are generally detrimental with this upgrade path. And there's a lot of different things that we can say about generally detrimental triggers. But one of the things I want to talk about first is Howling Mind. Howling Mind's a neat card because it has at the beginning of each player's draw step, if Howling Mind is untapped, that player draws an additional card. So if I miss that trigger and I'm the one that controls Howling Mind, that's not detrimental. But if my opponent does not draw the additional card on their draw step and I fail to tell them and I'm like, haha, got you, that's actually that's
cheats. Like if they go, haha, I got you. That's cheats.
That's cheats. But if we go and we end up calling a judge over it, it's not necessarily hey I got you, but
okay.
we call a judge over it, and judge comes over. They're going to issue a missed trigger warning to me for that.
For me failing to draw from your Howling Mind.
Yes. Yeah.
Because
Bryan,
it is
you should have drawn that card, man.
You didn't tell me.
I know,
you were too busy like giggling about something. You didn't want to tell me what it was about.
Well, I was giggling about Crow of Dark Tidings. Because Crow of Dark Tidings has on it, when this creature enters or dies, mill 2 cards. Now, mill is not necessarily... Sometimes that's something that's a beneficial effect for your deck, but it's still a detrimental thing. So... if I miss that, then that could be considered detrimental. detrimental triggers are important with all of this. I know that Marcus knows a little something about this and something about Amulet. I don't know. Yeah, Marcus, what do you know about Amulet?
I know a thing or two about Amulet. I know that generally the idea of when you play a land, a trigger that says you have to return a land to your hand is generally detrimental. And I will say, a lot of times when like Amulet players are deep in the tank and they're going off, and even if a judge is sitting there watching the match, they are not for some reason giving out the warnings because that is a generally detrimental trigger that they are missing. And if they miss it, for some reason, I'm not seeing judges giving the warning on that, but you absolutely should be giving a warning because that is a very detrimental trigger to not be able to keep your lands on the battlefield, you know?
So here's a good way to think about detrimental triggers, okay? Is on the card, within the context of the card, the trigger is bad, okay? But not necessarily within the context of the deck that it's being used in. Like some harmful triggers can be turned around into a good thing in the right deck. The original Eldrazi Titan, right? Okay, but that doesn't mean that the trigger, when just looking at the card, isn't generally detrimental. Okay, and then another thing that's not detrimental, like Bob, like Dark Confidant, used to be considered one of the best cards in Extended. Extended was the format that existed before Modern, right? Okay, without that trigger, it's just a stupid 2/1 for 2. It's terrible, but it used to be like the terror of a format because that trigger, there's no way you can argue that that trigger is generally detrimental when you look at the card and go, that's pretty good.
Yeah, you don't play the card otherwise.
Right. Yeah, so the things to remember about the upgrade is it's just upgrading to a warning. We are only upgrading it when the trigger is generally detrimental. Okay, maybe not necessarily detrimental in this specific case, but generally so. The trigger is I own the card that's creating the trigger, as opposed to I'm imposing a trigger upon my opponent. And then you can factor in symmetrical abilities. Howling Mind's kind of the poster child for a symmetrical ability. A card that is not a symmetrical ability is a card I really should have looked up before I started talking. No, the card is, there's a card called that's in the Annotated IPG as an example, called Sire of Insanity. Sire of Insanity says at the beginning of each end step, each player discards his or her hand. Now you might say, hey, that seems symmetrical because it's doing the same thing to everybody, but it's actually not. It's not symmetrical in the same way that Howling Mind is. Howling Mind is, you draw a card, I draw a card. You draw a card, I draw a card. Like the pendulum swings back and forth. Sire of Insanity is, everybody does the thing, blam. That's not symmetrical, per this definition. All right, clear as mud?
Yeah.
Super clear.
Okay, what's next?
I love this one. So, Hidden Card Error does have an upgrade, and it's a very specific upgrade, and it relates to one of my favorite mechanics, and actually one of Bryan's favorite mechanics as well, Morph, or using face-down cards. So,
actually, I prefer Megamorph.
Sure. You could hear the disappointment in my voice. Anyways, so the upgrade for Hidden Card Error is if a face-down card cast using a Morph or Disguise ability is on the battlefield during the game and is found to not have the relevant ability printed on the card, the penalty is a game loss, not the standard warning that normally comes with Hidden Card Error. Now I'm going to read this part because it's also very important and also clear as mud. If the player has one or more cards with the same ability in hand, has not added previously unknown cards to their hand since casting the card found in violation, and has self-reported the error before an effect would reveal it is played, the upgrade does not apply, and they may swap the card for a card with the appropriate ability in hand. Okay, that's a lot. Let's break it down. First off, this is basically meant to fix the oopsie of I have 2 green cards in my hand from, let's say, Khans of Tarkir, where this originally started in, or it might have even been before that, but in Khans of Tarkir, there were 2 green cards. One that had morph, the other did not. They looked very similar, and it was a very, very frequent occurrence that you would put the wrong card face down just because, you're a Magic player. You're flicking your cards back and forth in your hand all day long, and you just confused which of those green cards you were flicking about had the morph ability or not. So you put the one that doesn't have morph face down, and that exception there is meant to say, oh, if it's reasonable that we assume this was really genuinely a mistake, we're not going to upgrade it. So we're giving you kind of an out to this upgrade because this can be a genuine, honest mistake. But the only time we can determine that it is for realsies a mistake is if you've done basically nothing else. No other cards that were unknown went to your hand and now could be that morph that you forgot to put face down. Because really, we're trying to avoid people just cheating, outright cheating, by putting a card face down and saying like, oh yeah, pay 3 mana, I have a morph, teehee, and then hoping nobody catches on, right?
So what I wanted to get on was the downgrade criteria actually has a lot of elements to it. It's the fact that you've got to, when the problem is discovered, A, you're the one that has to discover it. You have to self-report. B, you have to have a card in your hand with the morph ability, at least one. Yep. You have to have not added any cards to your hand since you put that oopsie card onto the battlefield. Mm-hmm. And it's got to be, you've got to report this before an effect would reveal that card on the battlefield. So if Marco shocks my creature, and then I'm like, oh, let me flip it over and self-report that my forest is actually, my morph creature is actually a forest. No. That's going to be probably a DQ.
Yeah.
Maybe just a game loss. Yes, the ultimate upgrade. But it's going to be probably a game loss because I didn't report it before I would be, air quotes, found out.
Yep.
Okay.
So all this is to mitigate that potential advantage you can have by being able to put, let's say, a forest face down and say you have an extra creature. Yeah. Otherwise, normally it's hidden card error, it's the Thoughtseize fix, you would normally get a warning. Here, because there's a lot of potential for cheats and people trying to get away with cheats by saying it was an innocent mistake, that there's a very specific outlined way that you can assume this is actually an innocent mistake. But if any of these criteria don't apply, we cannot have any degree of certainty that this was an actual innocent mistake, in which case, got to give you the game loss, because then I bet you will stop flicking those cards around your hand and actually look at the card you're putting face down.
You will not. You cannot make that guarantee. Players will not stop flicking. Another thing that I do want to illustrate is in the first sentence, it says, if a face down card is cast using a morph or disguise ability, is on the battlefield during the game. Okay. This covers, like, you've got a 2/2 and I bounce it and you just pick it up and put it into your hand. Okay. That is not an upgrade. The upgrade case does not apply to that. Okay. We are at the end of game and you just pick up your face down creature and shuffle it in. That does not trigger the upgrade. This is a card that is on the battlefield. And the reason being, okay, if Charles has a 2/2 creature and I shock it, okay, I actually have the ability to say, like, shock and let me see what that is. Okay, at the end of the game, I can still say scoop and I get to see that card. Like, I, as the opponent, or the person, I have control over when I cast shock on the creature. I get to see it. And I have control over, I am scooping, I am making the decision to end the game.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Next up, so we've covered the specific gameplay errors. So now we have a general gameplay error upgrade. And Charles mentioned this when we were talking about mistrigger. Okay. So the document says, with the exception of failure to maintain game state, which is never upgraded, we have to call out the fact that we never upgrade that. The third or subsequent warning for a gameplay error offense in the same category is upgraded to a game loss. For multi-day tournaments, the penalty count for these infractions resets between days. Okay. When we say same category, we mean like hidden card error, like 3 hidden card errors or 3 looking at extra cards. Okay. We don't mean a looking at extra cards, a hidden card error, and a partridge in a pear tree. Okay. It's 3 of the same type. It's also the third warning. So if I were to get, let's say, hidden card error, I'm playing my Morph Manifest Cloak and Disguise CEDH deck. Sure. And we're using competitive REL and whatever. I commit HCE, I get a warning. I then commit HCE and get an upgrade game loss. Okay. And then next round, I commit HCE again. And it's a warning. We don't look at my third HCE. We look at my third warning for an HCE. Okay. So I get my third warning gets upgraded. So it's not my third HCE, it's my third HCE warning gets upgraded to a game loss. The fact that I already got a game loss, kind of sucks, but yeah, I get another freebie, yay. So for multi-day tournaments, especially when they're like 8 rounds, 9 rounds, that's a really long time. So realistically, we reset the counts just because not resetting the counts is miserable. There you go. There's the reason for that. And then failure to maintain game state. Why is failure to maintain game state not upgraded?
Because it's the most wag of the finger penalty we have, essentially. Because failure to maintain game state just means like somebody else made a gameplay error and you let them. And upgrading the fact that you just let them make a mistake because you were trying to play your own side of the table doesn't really merit an upgrade here because, yeah, we're going to keep encouraging you to watch your opponent, but it doesn't merit a game loss.
Right. You shouldn't F6 3 times and risk getting a game loss.
Correct.
Failure to maintain game state has always been a weird one to me, because we're going to issue that. We're going to issue the warning, but nothing comes of it. It's almost like a concession to the human condition that, 2 players who are playing a competitive game of Magic and one of them misses the thing and feels like the other one should have said something. And it's a concession to that is the way I sometimes look at it. It really is almost a nothing error.
It sort of is. So the reason for it existing is so much of the game is based on the opponent watching what you're doing. Okay. So we kind of have to give a little bit of if you zone out
right
and don't pay attention, we have to be like, well, you got to own a little bit of responsibility for this because all of these infractions are based around you paying attention. Like hidden card error. That's not actually a thing normally that the opponent would get HCE for, or not HCE, a failure to maintain game state for, because you notice that stuff right away, right? Like we don't discover hidden card error, a turn later. Generally, we discover it right away, because the opponent's paying attention.
It's just weird. It's a weird.
So that's gameplay errors.
Yeah.
Let's now talk about tournament errors. What's our first tournament error?
Our first tournament error is tardiness, and it's an interesting one. Basically, a player who's not in their seat 10 minutes into the round can receive or will receive a match loss and gets dropped from the tournament unless they report to the head judge or scorekeeper before the end of that round. So, round starts, timer starts counting down from 50 or whatever the time is, but generally 50. And it hits to 40 and the player doesn't have their opponent yet. That opponent who has not shown up is going to receive a match loss. Now, it sounds severe. 10 minutes, match loss. Why isn't it a game loss? Why isn't it this? Why isn't it that? One of the main reasons for that is because nobody's got time for that. All right. The player who sat down at the table deserves the chance to go and eat. They shouldn't have to wait another 5 minutes, another 10 minutes to see if you've decided to make time for the tournament. They should be able to go and move about and get on with their lives. The other reason is, and it's very, very, very straightforward, a lot of times when they don't show up, they've decided to dip. They're 0-2, 0-3,
Yep.
whatever, and they're like, I'm out. It's much more expedient to issue the match loss than it is for us to hold out hope that you are the one person in 50 that got stuck in the bathroom an extra minute because there wasn't enough TP in the stall. I don't know. Okay, I'm not one to judge. But if something like that happens, go and talk to the scorekeeper, get yourself reinstated. You will end up with the match loss for that round. It happens. Stuff happens. If you're really doing well that day, maybe you'll turn it around. So it's also kind of a functional thing that happens, that if you have to leave the table and you call a judge, you have to leave the table for more than 10 minutes, you're also going to receive a match loss for not getting back in time. So bathroom break, replacement for missing cards, those types of things, you are given 10 minutes. The judge should start watching that the moment you leave, and you need to be back in that time frame. And don't, lollygag and try and buy, those 3 other pieces that you need for the EDH deck that you're going to play the next day. Get your business done and get back to the table.
Yep. Realistically, with tardiness, there has to be a line. Like, I think we can all agree. Yes. Realistically, if you're 50 minutes late for your match, you should not be playing. You don't get that match.
And
right?
Unless you're sick, there isn't a tournament hall in the world where you can't get to a bathroom and get back to your seat within 10 minutes under most reasonable circumstances.
Right. So we agree that there is a line. And so we're now just discussing where that line is going to be. Right. And 10 minutes seems to be exceptionally reasonable. And it's a time that can apply to being late. It can apply for replacing cards. It can apply to long poop. It can apply to all sorts of different things. And so there you go.
Yeah, and quick reminder for the judges who are taking the call of, Judge, I need to go to the bathroom. I know it's really easy to just kind of be like, oh, easy call, let me hang here with the stuff and make sure he doesn't get robbed while they're going to the bathroom. Make sure to point out to them, okay, you have 10 minutes. Because if you don't, and they take 15 to come back, now you're in a much more complicated situation than you originally intended yourself to be in. So make sure they're aware of that time limit before they step away for the restroom.
I prefer to just say you need to hurry back.
Yeah, and
that also works, yeah.
And don't forget, we haven't done one in a very, very long time, but I may as well point it out now. If you're on bathroom break duty for a team match, that the team member leaves their electronic behind, i.e. they leave their phone at the table when they go to the bathroom.
Bathroom duty?
Yeah.
Is that a pun?
Yeah, well,
yes.
Okay.
Yes. But make sure that happens. Anyway, so tardiness, 10 minutes. There we go.
Okay.
Upgrades from game loss to match loss.
Yeah.
What next, yo?
All right. So this is the fun penalty deck problem that has 3 upgrades associated with it. So who knows? Maybe we'll round robin this. I don't know. We'll see how long I can dive into each one of these.
All right. Go for it.
All right, first one, upgrade. In games before sideboarding, while the deck is presented to the opponent for pregame shuffling or during a deck check, if the deck contains fewer cards than registered, parentheses, and any missing cards are not in the opponent's deck, end parentheses, or the sideboard contains more cards than registered, the penalty is a game loss. So I'm just going to stop there real quick and just highlight that first little bit of this policy. So specifically, it starts off in games before sideboarding. So game 1 of the match. If a deck is presented to your opponent, you have said, I am presenting you a legal for this tournament deck. And now it's up to you to shuffle and present the deck and do all that. Or you get deck checked after having presented your deck to your opponent. if your deck has less cards than you registered. So, and let's say you registered 60 cards, you have 59 in there. Whoopsie. That is a game loss because you just don't have the cards you need to play your legal deck. Or let's say your sideboard contains more cards than registered. Odds are you're either, well, there we're probably sniffing around for some cheats, or what might have realistically happened, you left some cards in your sideboard and didn't fully desideboard properly after your last match, stuff like that.
So this wording actually changed somewhat recently because it says
It did.
contains fewer than registered. It used to say an invalid number of cards. Okay.
Correct.
Which didn't handle the case of, so Marcos pointed out, I have registered a 60 card deck, I present 59 cards. Okay, what if I had a 61 card deck and I presented 60 cards? Or I registered 61 cards and I presented 60 cards. That is not an invalid number of cards because it's 60 and 60 is the minimum I can have, but it didn't match what I registered.
Yeah. And Amulet players like to do that a lot. They like to register 61 and 15.
Yep.
And that kind of coincides with the idea of your sideboard containing more cards than registered too, because you can't sideboard into a 60 card deck and 16 in your sideboard.
Yep. Okay.
So now to the second half of this first upgrade. This is why we're going to tag team this one. So now we talked already in the first half about in-games before sideboarding. Now let's talk about in-games after sideboarding. In games after sideboarding, while the deck is presented to the opponent for pre-game shuffling or during a deck check. So again, this is the I have presented to my opponent, this is a legal deck. If the deck contains fewer cards than the format minimum, and any missing cards are not in the opponent's deck, or the sideboard contains more cards than the format maximum, the penalty is a game loss. So here it's more, I've done some creative sideboarding, and yet somehow I have presented a 59 card deck, or I have 17 cards in my sideboard somehow. Either one of those will get you an upgrade from a normal warning of deck problem up to a game loss.
Yep. All right.
Phew. Help.
Okay. Yep. The next upgrade. So remember, deck. This right here. The deck problem is the contents of your deck or sideboard don't match your registered list, and the deck list is correct. Okay. So now the next upgrade is typically in game one. Okay. If an opponent may have made strategic decisions based on the presence of a sideboard card. Okay. The penalty is a game loss. Now, what do we mean by strategic decisions based on the presence of a sideboard? Okay, such as having seen it in the hand or library during a search effect. So if you've got a sideboard card in your hand, and if Charles has a sideboard card in his hand, and I thought sees him, and he reveals his hand, and I look at it, and he's got a sideboard card in his hand, and I write it down, and I start playing around that card, and then later we discover that that card shouldn't be there in this game, the penalty is upgraded to a game loss. Or if I'm searching his library due to a search effect and I'm looking at all the cards, I notice he's got 4 copies of a thing, and I'm like, oh, make a note of that. He's got 4 copies of a particular card. Okay. That is if, because again, from a penalty standpoint, I don't necessarily know that you have your deck and deck list don't match, that you're playing a pre-boarded deck. Okay, so in those particular cases, and you didn't call it on yourself, you maybe didn't have an opportunity to, but I, the opponent, have made strategic decisions based on that, or potentially made strategic decisions, we upgrade to a game loss.
Sounds very reasonable.
Yeah,
it does.
I kind of like it. The third upgrade here for deck problem is something that's a little bit complicated, but if you follow along, I think we'll get it. If an error resulted in more copies of a main deck card being played than were registered or allowed by companion restriction, the penalty is a game loss unless all copies of the card are still in the random portion of the library. What's that mean? All copies of the card are still in the random portion of the library. So let's say that we have Shock, okay? Let's say that we registered 2 copies of Shock, and let's say that there are actually 3 copies in the deck for whatever reason. Maybe we forgot to desideboard because there were 2 other copies in the sideboard, okay. and we present a deck with 3 copies. So we're playing along, and we dump one of the cards. We shock our opponent for something, and one of those copies ends up in the graveyard. And then our opponent does something where they're able to search our library, and they find 2 copies of shock in the library, and we have registered only 2. Suddenly there are 3 copies, right? There's 1 in the graveyard, 2 in the library. That's an upgrade. Mm-hmm. Now, if those 3 copies are all in the library, and it's discovered that there are 3 copies in the library, and we only register 2, that's not upgraded.
Yeah. So here's what the situation is.
Right?
Is normally
A little weird.
So typically when we're giving warnings for deck problems, we're swapping out cards from the deck and the sideboard. Like, that's typically the most common thing is player forgot to de-sideboard. So we're taking out the sideboard cards out of the deck and we're putting the main deck cards in. Okay. And we deal with that by letting the opponent pick which cards go where. They go into the, if I have like a sideboard card in my hand, then we're returning the main deck card. The opponent gets to say, okay, that card replaces that card in the hand, that card replaces that card in the library. There we go. With this particular case, the shock case, I've got 2 shocks in my main deck, 2 shocks in my sideboard. I've got 3 shocks physically in my deck. That 1 shock I played, we don't actually know whether that was one of the 2 shocks that's supposed to be there or the 3rd shock that's not. And that's why it gets upgraded, because we can't undo the advantage because which shock is it supposed to be? We don't know. You don't number your shocks.
Your odds of drawing a shock now have gone up by a percentage, and that's because you drew it. Now we can't unring that bell. If you never drew it, well, then no harm, no foul. We can still mitigate that.
Yep.
All right. And then there's one more little pseudo upgrade in there, which set in deck problem that says in the additional remedy text, it's just kind of snuck in there. It says, hey, if you're trying to fix the deck to match the companion restriction, and you just can't, fix it, upgrade to a game loss. So it's basically like, no, I want to play this companion, and you just can't make it work. You can't swap cards out. No way to make it work. It's game loss. Deuces. All right.
Trays.
Marked cards. What's up? What's up, marked cards?
Am I marked cards? I'm marked
sure.
cards.
You're Marco's cards.
I think it has rolled back around to you.
All right. So with marked cards, there's actually a couple of upgrades here as well. Although I think I can handle these, so we'll see.
Okay.
I'll tag out if I'm too sleepy.
Sure.
Anyways.
Are you sure? I'm noticing a pattern.
Hey, podcast pros.
Wow. Yeah.
Marco's cards.
Yes. All right.
Okay.
All right, podcast pros into the segue. So we are talking about marked cards here, and that is, we've found that some cards in your deck are marked in some way. You might have some of those fun secret lair foils that come to you in the box, like a couple of Pringles, or you might find that there's a little bit of a pattern to some of these little sleeves that have this little corner nicked a little bit, and we need to change those out. There are a couple of upgrades associated with marked cards. The first one being, if we ask you to replace the card because, let's say, you got a Pringle in place of a Magic card because of the curling of that foil, if the player is unable to find replacement cards for the cards they need to replace to get rid of the marked card problem, they may replace those cards with any combination of cards named Plains, Island, Swamp, Mountain, or Forest. Now, because this will require us to change the deck list to match the new contents of the deck, the penalty here is now upgraded from a warning to a game loss. Because remember, anytime we have to change the deck list to match what you're playing, that is a game loss. And this is effectively taking this marked cards fix and saying if we have to change the deck list, we're putting it in line with deck list problem. Now, you can revert this change at a later point without any further penalty if you do end up finding the proper replacements. So let's say I have a foil to fairy and it's just bent completely out of shape and I cannot find a replacement in the 10 minutes that I have to go find one. Okay, I take the L, I get the game loss, I replace it with an island, and then later on, after I just got completely obliterated by aggro, now I have some time to go around to all the vendors in the room, find a replacement, or talk to one of my buddies, find a replacement for that card. Now I can go back to the judge staff and say, hey, judges, I found a suitable replacement for that. We're not taking back your game loss that's already applied, but we're not going to penalize you any further because now you have the right card that you had intended to play originally in your deck list.
Sounds reasonable.
Yeah, super reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next upgrade is, if the head judge believes that a deck's owner noticing the pattern of markings would be able to gain a substantial advantage from this knowledge, the penalty is a game loss. This is also pretty straightforward. If we find that, all of, let's say, your Tron lands are marked in your deck, well, yeah, that's really something you can take an advantage from, because now you can easily find your important pieces to play your cards.
Hang on.
Yes.
You just changed the text of the upgrade a little bit.
Did I?
Because it says would be able to gain a substantial advantage. Whereas you just said gain an advantage. Now granted, Tron lands, yes, if all your Tron lands, that is a substantial advantage. However, that little word there, substantial, does some heavy lifting. Because imagine...
It very much does.
Imagine, for a second, if a single card in your deck, you were playing... Charles, what's your favorite mono-red card or mono-red deck?
My favorite mono-red deck?
Yeah.
Anything with Lightning Bolt in it is fine.
Okay, mono lightning bolt deck. Okay. Yep. And one of his mountains has a little ding in the corner of the sleeve. Okay. That is Charles runs 20 mountains. Okay, maybe. I don't know. You seem like
sounds like a lot. I might get away with 19 sometimes.
Yeah. Yep. Okay.
He seems like a 17 or 18 lander.
Charles runs 17 mountains. Got it. That's one of those mountains. People will argue if I'm looking at the top of my deck and I see that ding there, it is a advantage to look and see and know that top card is a mountain.
But what if all 17 have that ding?
That's substantial.
That is substantial.
The point that I want to make is knowing that top card is 1 out of 17 mountains. Yes, it is an advantage. It's not a substantial one. Okay.
Yeah, and I know a lot of judges do like to make arguments as to whether something is substantial, and it's interesting because this is technically subjective. Like, you can make a case and you can potentially make an argument that a substantial advantage could be gained by knowledge of what card is coming in your deck, or a way to be able to cut to a particular one of card.
Hang
like,
I want to say, in my particular case, I was saying mountain. If we change it to the one of win condition card, and it has the same marking, that does become a substantial advantage.
That's where I was going with it.
Oh, so that is?
We're talking like, so when I say one of, that might be one of my 4 Teferis, or one of, a playset of lightning bolts. But if it is the one of Thassa's Oracle in my Nadu deck that I needed to win, well, that can absolutely be a substantial advantage. And I think that's kind of where the line gets drawn, because you can always make the argument for something potentially being an advantage, but how much of an advantage is it when you factor in the content of the deck? Is it a combo piece? Is it an important piece of interaction? Is it something that they might need to find in a hurry if they find themselves in a bad matchup? There's a lot of factors to consider before you decide, is this substantial enough? And that is also, I believe, why this says if the head judge believes that a deck's owner noticing the pattern, it's an investigation that will likely need to be done by the head judge. So the head judge is the one who will make the call on the upgrade here. If you're on the deck checks team and you notice this, definitely point it out, but flag down your head judge and go, hey, head judge, we got something for you.
You actually bring up a good point that we did not include in the show notes. So I would like to kind of play pretend that we had it in here at all times.
Sure.
All of these upgrades, with just a few minor ones, and we'll go over these, you should be involving the head judge or the appeals judge. anytime that you feel that, anytime you run across a situation where you believe that an upgrade is appropriate. Okay. With the exceptions of warning for mistrigger. Okay, no one cares about that. You're upgrading. Sure, go ahead. The upgrade to a game loss for
Tardiness.
Not the game loss for tardiness isn't an upgrade, right?
Right.
It's the match loss. Okay, match loss for tardiness, you do not have to check in with the head judge. Also, the game loss for deck problem, you do not have to check in with the head judge, because those are all very, very clear, very, very unambiguous things with no judgment component involved.
Right. Generally though, the deck problem thing, you'll be on a team and you'll be actually talking to your team lead, and somebody you'll be consulting with somebody. So there's that caveat with that.
But the other ones, you absolutely want to run that. You want to get the head judge involved, because realistically they involve game losses, and anything of a game loss or higher should be involving the head judge, with the exception of tardiness and deck problem.
The one thing that I do want to say, though, is that with a very, very large tournament, sometimes there's different guidelines for this. Sometimes with SCG, they'll want you to check in with Keystone. Sometimes with a large GP style event, they'll want you to check in with your team lead, who will often be a L3 or higher. They will give you guidelines if you're working these types of events, and just follow them. They're very straightforward.
Yep.
Yeah. I think also the other aspect is a lot of these, because we've mentioned this a few times now, when we are upgrading penalties, it's because we're trying to mitigate potential advantages that could be abused by somebody trying to cheat and then trying to get away with saying it was an innocent mistake. And that means you should be performing or involving the head judge to perform an investigation to make sure of what is actually happening here. Because when you're doing these upgrades, you have to be sure that it is only the upgrade as necessary and not the ultimate upgrade of, I'm removing you from this event because you're cheating.
Right. Like if you find the morph situation where someone just had like a face down forest as their disguise, you know, and then you discover that it's a forest in the middle of the game, like the opponent discovers, there should be some questions asked, as opposed to just, here's your game loss.
Yep.
All right.
100%.
So we just covered all the specific infractions, the specific upgrades for tournament errors. Now there's a generic one. Just like for gameplay errors, tournament errors also have their warnings upgraded after the second instance. Okay, for multi-day tournaments, the penalties reset. So for tournament errors, things like insufficient shuffling. Okay, the first time you insufficient shuffling, it's bad. You know, you get your warning. The second time is it gets upgraded to a game loss. Marked cards, if you get a warning for marked cards because they don't have a pattern, then you get it again, it's going to get upgraded to a game loss. If you put the top card onto your draft pile and then pull it back twice in a draft, that's going to get upgraded to a game loss.
Yep, the ever popular limited procedure violation.
Not that I've ever seen that happen.
Yeah. But there's a philosophical thing that's happening here, right? And I love digging into the philosophical stuff, and I love hearing about it. And this one I think is pretty easy to point out. It's that all of these errors that Bryan just listed are really easy to not replicate. You know,
they're easy to not. They're hard to reproduce.
They're really easy to not replicate.
Okay,
you're told to not do these things. Okay, you're told, hey, you have shuffled insufficiently. You're going to receive a warning. If you do this again, you're going to receive a game loss. It's very, very easy to take that information and say, okay, I have not shuffled correctly. I will shuffle more in the future, and just do that, right? When we talk about game rule violations, okay, Magic is complex. There's a lot of moving pieces. Shoot, I should have done the thing. I'm just very bad at it. I should have done the thing. Or I'm tired. I haven't had a good meal because I play blue. Any number of reasons, right? The bottom line is, though, is that all these little things that Bryan just mentioned, They're all so easily corrected and so easily adapted into what you're doing that you take the instruction, you do the thing, it's not hard. That's why.
Yeah.
Also because they don't happen as frequently and so on. But philosophically speaking, I think that's a really important thing to point out as to why the penalty exists the way that it does.
Yeah. Now here's another thing. It's not the second tournament error, like tardiness, for example. Okay, let's just look at tardiness, for example. That's a game loss. So if someone's 5 minutes late, and then next round they're 5 minutes late again, that isn't upgraded to a match loss because the penalty specifically says a warning. Okay, but that philosophy is even worked into tardiness because you get that one-time 1 minute downgrade to a warning. So if you get that penalty again, it would be upgraded to a game loss.
All right. So,
yeah.
To wrap up, we have a couple more things to review.
Okay.
I want to go over the USCs and one other item. So USC minor is an interesting one. If you give a warning for a USC minor and then you give any further infraction that day for a USC minor, and it doesn't have to be the same reason. Minor infractions, even for different offenses, it results in a game loss for the second one. USC major, there's an upgrade path.
Well, let's clarify when you say for different offenses. Let's just I'm swearing a lot.
Okay.
It's JudgeCast after hours, after dark. I'm swearing a lot.
Yeah.
I could get a USC minor for that.
Right.
Then later,
maybe you throw your deck on the ground.
I throw my deck on the ground.
Yeah.
Those are both USC minor, but they are different types of USC.
They're different.
They're both
reasons
USC
for it.
minor, but they're different issues.
Yeah.
They're different offenses.
Yeah. Basically, USC minor is talking about behavior a lot of the time. And what we're talking about here are two completely different behaviors. And in those cases, you're going to get upgraded on the second behavior. Be nice. It's not hard, right? Right.
Yep.
USC major, there's an upgrade path if the offense is committed with a malicious intent. We'll get into these in a second. The player displays no remorse, or the offense is repeated at a later time. The penalty is disqualification or removal from the venue. There's a reason that this is upgraded straight to disqualification or removal from the venue. Malicious intent is a situation where a player is actively trying to hurt the other person, either verbally or whatever's going on. If I called Marcos a name, let's say I used something derogatory and called him something derogatory, and I did so with the design to make him upset, that's a malicious intent. Okay. It's not, I was just trying to josh with him, or I was just trying to mess with him, or I was just having a good time and I expressed myself poorly. I'm actually trying to hurt him. That's malicious.
Yeah. Can I give another, using
please.
one of the examples?
Yeah.
Okay. One of the examples says a player purposefully obstructs another player with the intent of inducing physical contact.
Oh yeah, sure.
Now you read that example and you say, how can someone commit that? How can someone do that without malicious intent? And I'll tell you how. Okay, we're splitting hairs here a little bit, but there is, I am doing this to induce physical contact because I want it. Okay, versus I am doing it to make them uncomfortable. Okay, the first one is not malicious intent. The second reason is, and I realize that's splitting hairs a little bit, but generally speaking, if you can say, hey, can you understand how this would make someone uncomfortable? And they go, oh crap, you're right. Mm-hmm. That's not malicious intent. Okay.
Yeah, that's remorse right there. That's recognition of, I shouldn't have done that.
I didn't think, I was just thinking about myself. Mm-hmm. I was thinking inward for what I wanted, not necessarily how it would impact somebody else. But if I'm doing it specifically because, hey, they've told me they don't like it. They told me they don't want to. Like, one of the other examples is a player takes inappropriate photos of another player without express permission. Okay.
Yes, we know why it's in there. Go ahead, Bryan.
We know why it's in there, but you could be like, I'm just doing it to have fun. And you say, can you stop for a second and think about how that could cause problems? And they go, oh, I didn't think.
Yep.
Yeah. I can now that you stopped me and made me rub two brain cells together, I can see where that's bad.
Right.
That's the distinction.
Right. When a player displays no remorse, and let's be very, very clear here, a player can display remorse a number of different ways. They don't actually have to say the words, I'm sorry. Now, is it nice? Yes. Should they apologize? Oftentimes,
Maybe.
Yes.
Maybe.
But oftentimes, yes. But do they have to sit there and actually say those words? Do they have to do they have to bow down? No. What they do need to do is they need to admit, hey, yeah, I get it. I know that I made a mistake here. That type of thing. Or even body language. I mean, some people are kind of nonverbal when they get confronted. You have to be able to read the room here a little bit. But if they show no remorse at all, if they stick to their guns, if they're going to continue to be we're going to bounce them, right? And then, of course, if offensive is repeated at a later time, it's also serious. Because if we get to the point where we're dealing with one of the examples in USC Major and they do it again, they haven't learned anything over the course of the day. They need to go.
Yeah, you need to go.
And then, of course, the last one is improperly determining a winner in bribery.
Improperly determining a bribe.
Yeah. At competitive, both of those things are match losses. However, if the player or players knew they were not allowed to perform that action, and we would hopefully get to that information through a brief investigation, we don't actually upgrade to a DQ in these cases. We don't. It's not considered an actual upgrade, and it's splitting hairs a little bit. But what it is the infraction changes. It's no longer improperly determining a winner in bribery. It is now USC cheating. They have done the bad thing. It's kind of an upgrade, but technically it's not. And technically correct is the best kind of correct. And I hate that quote, right. But
if all you're looking at is the result, it is an upgrade. But if you're being the pedantic judge that we all are deep down in our heart and soul,
that we know and love,
some of us,
yes, then it is not an upgrade. We're changing the infraction.
Right.
Yes, and I know I've been joking a lot about upgrading you to a disqualification, but yeah, it is not actually an upgrade. And it is just the thing is happening.
Right, and in fact, some of these things you have to ask questions as you're going through this process. It's not, not everything in life is a flowchart, even though HCE probably is. You have to sit there and ask the dumb questions. You have to ask the questions you think you know the answers to. You have to ask the players questions that may not make sense in the moment to anybody. You have to ask questions, because through asking questions, you're going to suss out the occasion where one of these items isn't going to be an actual upgrade. It is going to be cheating, and you are going to figure it out. I don't want you going into every investigation thinking, oh, this is cheating. That's not what I'm trying to tell you. What I'm trying to tell you, though, is don't do things paint by numbers so much that you never catch the person who is cheating, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you should have some method upon which you start hearing a story, and alarm bells should start going off immediately when you go, I need to ask more questions because A plus B does not equal C unless cheats.
Play Magic, folks. If you play more Magic, you'll actually pick up on these things too, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway. Do we have anything else for the good of the order tonight?
Nothing here.
Bryan, are you happy?
In general or with the podcast?
Yeah, I know the answer there. Okay.
All right.
So that's our episode.
I'm just checking here.
No. We get it. All right. That's our episode. Join us next time as actually, we're not even going to talk about next time. what I am going to do is I'm going to take a moment to say how lucky, how proud, how thankful I am to get to work with these two wonderful human beings every couple of weeks. And what I want to share is that we're going to venture into something new, and we're going to bring you along for the ride. Starting almost as soon as this episode is up, maybe even a little bit before, maybe right after, we're going to have a YouTube channel. This episode will be one of the first ones posted, but also we'll be helping new judge candidates cross the bridge into becoming level 1 judges. That's right. You've heard about it several different times. We have engaged in a contract with Judge Foundry, and we're going to start bringing forth educational content to help judges learn how to do the thing. And we're going to do it on YouTube. So
you've heard about it somewhere else, but you've seen it here first.
Yes.
Wait.
And yeah, and it's going to be fabulous, and you're all going to love it. And I cannot wait for it to come out, and it's coming out now, literally now. So go search YouTube for JudgeCast, check our show notes, check our socials. You'll find out information. So
like and subscribe.
Yes, like and subscribe. Hit that button thing, whatever. Okay.
Ring the bell.
Ring the bell. Until then, you can send us an email at judgecast@gmail.com, or like us on Facebook, or follow us on Twitter, JudgeCast, and on BlueSky at judgecast.bsky.social, and check out any of our social media for invite links to our Discord server for judges new and old, fans, and anyone who supports the judging community. I'm Charles Featherer, and I keep it fair.
I'm Marcos Sanchez, and I keep it fun.
I'm Bryan Perlman, and noticing a single one of me on your podcast does not provide you a substantial advantage.
That was great.
USC money.
You've been on a string of good ones, man.
It's because, like, I actually, normally what I do is I panic when Charles starts to say something. And then I'm like, oh crap,